Hi.
Hi, Pauline.
Hi.
Ah, so
we're
happy.
we're gonna do another session today.
Yeah. So following on from what I want to continue to do, which I don't know why I didn't do this. I haven't done this yet, but it doesn't matter the why of it. Now it's happening and it's good. Well, to not so casually dismiss the why of it, it's just it wasn't quite right, the timing yet.
Yeah.
And so things had to come together to evoke this, and your service to me helped that. Service in relationship, a reciprocal relationship of loving and serving one another.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So grateful.
Me too. Very much.
And so last time I had indicated that I would like to show you some of the prasad that came about as a result of our participating and living with Beloved in the context of him teaching us and awakening in us the process of sacred puja and establishing a priesthood, with him obviously as the initiator, or the context and the spirit within which we were given these instructions, and they were not verbal. At times they were, but the instruction that was actually given was an awakening initiation into what was already being communicated in relationship non-verbally, and also through in satsang and as a sangha around him, was the acknowledgement and the then embracing responsibility for conducting or participating in life in relationship to spirit and spirit breath, his person and his presence and his state of being. And of course, he used different words or different language at the time, pointing to these realities and the qualities of the self-position of the bright as we lived with him and in him. So it was in this context that he taught us and initiated us into this process of the priesthood. And in the context of that, we always would be studying synchronously in the great tradition, which he always indicated was essential, because that also, the great tradition is the embodied manifestation throughout time and space, as it seems to appear consecutively from the ego perspective, and linearly, which we know isn't true now. That we had to study the great tradition in order to understand the tool that he gave us as the 7 stages of life that correspond with the psychobiography and psychophysical structural mechanism that is the esoteric anatomy of the body-mind. And I'm not going to go into the detail of discussing that. I mean, Adi Da's teaching in detail describes that. And one of the things that he kept making very clear from the very beginning was that this way that he's giving us and instructing us and initiating us into, in terms of how to be able to radically understand and live in the person of the bright that is the very self of all, and the very being of any manifesting being or thing, is that we had to be able to consciously, through the conscious process and conductivity, through the responsibility for the psychophysical mechanism in relationship to everyone and everything, be able to manifest and serve the acknowledgement, invocation, empowerment, and to be able to serve the movement and the feeling relational process that is always the relationship. It is a relationship, always relationship to everyone and everything that arises. And being him sensitizing us to all of the psychophysical elements in the midst of that, you know, all of the elements. And there's numerous traditions that quantify, qualify, describe, enumerate, outline, make structures around all of the different aspects of the cosmic conditional domain. And doing that is creative, happy, interesting, experimental, exploratory, insightful, naturally something that human beings and even all beings, whether they're really conscious of it or not, are participating in that investigation. You know, that's where attention goes, energy goes. And the crux of Adi Da's initiating us into the priesthood, male or female, in conducting right life, which is what priesthood is, artfully and creatively, inherently, spontaneously, egolessly, participating in that entirely dependent upon recognition of his divine state of being, which is only him saying, this is your state of being, this is the true self, and this true self condition, then he would also synchronously then give us the instruction of how to consciously participate in the conducting of that. And the conducting of that, as he taught us and we observed in living with him, was not about introversion upon a separate self, a presumed internal separate self, or a reaction to life as a seeker in relationship to what arose. As though, I mean, both of those tie in with one another, that creates the self knot, the act of the ego. And acting upon that basis then creates the mummery drama, or where we're just costumed identities presuming separation from the divine condition, as though we're seeking for it, and therefore it's presumed to be absent. So the manner in which he taught us how to do puja was obviously based upon this radical understanding, gone to the root. In other words, the root, the heart itself in the gross, subtle, and causal realm of conscious being itself at the heart, in the heart domain. So the heart applies to the gross, the heart applies to the subtle, and then the heart applies to the root. But then, of course, the prior condition of the self, the Atmanadi Shakti, Atman and Shakti as one, is all inclusive. It's neither causal, subtle, or gross. And all of these esoteric understandings are absolutely key to the esotericism of it, is the real process and practice that transcends any viewing or participating in manifest conditional forms from point of view, no matter what the point of view is,
right?
Whether it's seeming positive or seeming negative.
And so by that, for example, there are many healers that can see things, for example, see things subtly, and then will participate in some form of what they feel is puja as it relates to that particular point of view. But even that, I feel like Beloved addressed. And I feel you said it, because I wasn't there when he addressed it, but you recounted that he asked the question, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, you can correct me, but as I recall it, you said something to the effect like, how can they see what they can't see, or something like that? What if they're relating to, I'm not exactly sure, but it's a good example of, I feel, someone who is sensitive to something that's at least not just the gross. You know, they're potentially seeing something within the fifth stage awakening, and they're perceiving something, right? And well, to use a different phrase, Beloved, you said Beloved instructed you and said, don't make much of conditional arising. Don't read into what is arising as if it's something to be related to in that way.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So this was in mid 2004.
Oh, wow. Okay. So,
After all these decades
yeah.
of him having empowered and instructed and initiated this capability, this responsibility to live as a priest, priestess. But and I was obsessed with it. I mean, I was overly obsessed with it, which is what he was addressing. Is I became too focused in the and dependent, so to speak, as a form of need. There were all sorts of nuances to how I was misusing this art, which it is. It's an art. An artful application became an obsession with too many objects, reading things into the psyche of things which could not necessarily be confirmed or dismissed. It just became like an overwhelming barrage of living in an amorphous kind of a world where everything then began to have meaning, you know, which maybe not.
Right.
Excuse me. So he said to me, this occurred because I would send him photographs of my surroundings wherever I lived, and kept him abreast of what was happening in my intimate life.
Yeah.
Even down to real intimate life in emotional sexual terms. Everything was being revealed or given to him so that he could then instruct and bless and or criticize or do whatever was necessary. And that's what I really thrived on. Apart, that was the sustenance, that was the life, that was the core, that was the context, that the direct relationship.
Yeah.
And but in the midst of it, the tension and energy would wander, and then I'd get distracted. And of course, I've described to you, as with every individual, the psychophysical makeup of this particular entity that is manifesting here in this time and space and place has vasanas, deeper personality issues, and the psychophysics of things that are continuing to make conjunctions or move and combine. And so the priesthood operates not merely in the physical level. Obviously, it's not ritualized. He would criticize this as becoming ritual ceremonialism. It doesn't have any depth to it. Or he would say that you're getting too distracted by the subtle realm and the higher mind in relationship to it. And even more profoundly, it would be you're dramatizing, manifesting the priesthood whilst being separate from me in the causal point, as presuming somehow or other you're still a separate being. Even if you may be experiencing or aware of the causal dimension of being, you're still relating to me separately, and therefore your relationship to the she or energy itself is that of an other. And that's not the way true yoga or true puja is done. The yoga and the puja is one and the same.
Yeah.
So it's all a synchronous event, synchronous at every level of the being. And then therefore the whole bodily being. And so I'll go back to this particular event. Did I complete my train of thought?
No, you did, and I threw you I threw you a question, so that that was a slight tangent on my part.
I dig it. I have no problem. Okay.
Yeah. So so in the 70s he started this.
Yes. And I'm going to bring you back to that point in time by telling you something I had indicated in our last conversation.
Yes.
Which is that when I entered into the process, he called me back to participate with him in his transcendental art manifestation is that he called me to do the She Is Mine suite with him. Well, what became the She Is Mine? It wasn't like I'm going to create the She Is Mine suite. When I came to see him, I brought this with me, and what is in this white folder is sacred history in one specific form relative to an aspect of what occurred when he taught us relative to true puja and the priesthood, which is the prasad that would come about as a result of any kind of actual enactment. And his word of enactment is an installation. It is an empowerment. It is an initiatory force that then activates the process for whoever participates in it. And if everything I describe here is again, the relationship. This is the yoga, this is the puja. And every aspect of life is this. And so when I brought this into his sphere again, I wanted to show him some of the sacred articles that I had from that process with him. And so we sat down on his bed in the manner of flowers. And it was just he and I, and his room is filled, and all of his rooms are always filled with sacred articles, sacred history, representing every aspect of this great tradition. As you know, sitting in these spaces and living with him for however long any of us did, or however long we entered into these spaces, it was sacred. They were temples everywhere. Everything was sacred and served a specific purpose in the process of his work with all beings and with seeming time and space as it manifested in this cosmic domain, and also then in all the reverberations at all levels of the being. And one of the first things that he taught us, and in this conversation, reminding me about the importance of how all aspects of the psychophysical mechanism, because we're manifest in a human form, a human bodily being has the capability to be able to be feelingly aware of, emphasis on feeling, feelingly aware, not just thinking or not just mind or not just brain mind, but feelingly aware of all the levels of manifestation. Okay, the ones that you might call angels, the one that you might call Siddha realm, the ones that you might call shamans, the one you might call the realm of magic, where true prayer works, you know, the psychophysics of why these things happen. And you get all the great traditions, you know, arguing about which one is true, just to prove the point that the world is a spiritual realm and it's psychophysical. And the conflict comes about by getting too much caught in the content and the manner in which people feel you have to do something a certain way or believe it in a certain way. And Adi Da kept unraveling those lies and those myths, truths, and misconceptions to bring us all into an understanding, a radical understanding about the nature of reality and how it is arising without the superimposition of point of view in the ego not that creates the conflict in relationship to the modes or means or views or dharma about how these things happen. So on this day, when we were going through this and remembering some of these events and occasions of the main thing is the establishment of the sanctuary at the Mountain of Attention. And every single building, all the space is imbued with the Leela of establishing sacred ground there that actually manifested a lesson and an empowerment relative to the psychophysical structural mechanism of the 7 stages of life, but embodied in the manifest space of the Mountain of Attention sanctuary.
Yes.
And every aspect of it serves that awakening process. And so he empowered all these sites with a very specific group of people, while also drawing as anyone who was available and were willing to and volunteering for participating and wanting to learn and grow in that wisdom and in that process. There were hundreds of people who participated in that. But then again, there were very specific individuals who were closest to him that he actually lived with day in and day out, as I described before. Now, this is a segue to what he said about this that was the most moving comment that I mentioned in the last conversation that we had. As he looked through this particular book, and I have to be very careful with all of these because they're fragile and they're old. And actually, the very earliest ones I have down here because I want to lift some of them up. I took them out of this stuff and put it over here. I'll show them to you one by one. That's what I want to do. But they have very, very early ash packets, many of which were actually handmade.
Hand-drawn. Wow, that's cool.
Hand-drawn. And by the children too. Like, I don't remember who did these, but or Shani or Cameron or some children could probably say, I did that one. Oh, they're not children anymore, sorry. They're very full-bloomed and grown adults and empowered in their own right and their own wisdom and their own process and leelas. But anyway, and this is pages. I have pages of those, okay, in here that are that I showed to him, and we sat on his bed and he went through this for a long time. We sat there reminiscing and remembering these events in this time. And then just to show you, I have a whole other bag. Wow. Full of them. Wow. Sadly, I don't have a lot from after his Mahasamadhi. However, Sukamai did send me some things from the brightness. You know, and which, bless her heart, I'm very grateful for. And she's a Maha priestess and needs help in the right way, you know, to conduct what she's attempting to conduct. So these they're just so potent. As I sit here, you know, I'm vibrating. You know, the whole body is vibratorily alive. And again, I'm saying all of the senses are alive and imbued with the feeling of this, even the space, his body, his breath, his skin, even the flowers in the room, the sense of the sacred history surrounding us, and the waters. I can hear the waters as we're speaking, you know, from his spa bath and from outside where the koi pond is, right outside his bedroom. You can see the light and feel the light reflecting in and off the mirror that is all the way across. So sitting with him in this space, it's important when we offer these leelas I want to try to paint the picture.
Yeah. Well, you do. That's one of your characteristics. You do very well. Just wanted to call that out because I've noticed this about you. It's an art form. You do it very well. You paint. I mean, it's probably. I'm just going to acknowledge. It's probably because you're a visual artist. I mean, you're also a musician. I understand. Like you chant, so you have auditory and visual, which is, you know, not everyone has that. Some people are more abstract in the mind, but you're able, and I've noticed this about you, you're able to remember details and describe them and draw the person into the space the same way that I've noticed, like with Beloved, his early writings were much more just bare bones, but then as he revisited, for example, the knee of listening, he started to add more and more and more colorful details about the quality and the characteristic of the time and the place that he was describing. So now, you know, people, for example, when they think of Tanita's speech, they just immediately think of Corona Radiata, right? Like he created a picture that like immediately draws a person into association with an experiential quality and characteristics that has a shamanic kind of force to it. So it is important. It's not trivial. Yeah.
No, that's right. And this is the installation art. This is the installation.
Yes, exactly.
It is puja. It is empowerment. It's participatory.
Yes.
In the room of conscious light itself.
Right.
And as you recall, and you were part of that initiatory process where he did that very thing with the happenine.
Yes, very much. Yes.
So much more detail and added to the whole that created and completed the trilogy.
Yeah.
And throughout all the years, this was also what was so wonderfully intimate with him, is the stories. He constantly would repeat stories with ever more elaborate detail, and so that you would like literally feel the effects of what it was that he experienced and described. And then you were part of that play, that he was orchestrating or describing as the narrator.
Yeah.
Identifying with the players, or the participants. I want to be that one. Oh no, I'm that one. Oh no, I don't like that one. I don't identify with that one. Oh, that's oh, I can really feel that one.
Exactly.
And then it triggers a participatory process.
Yes.
That he calls subjective, but then that's just what triggers it. It's not the subjectivity of the ego where it really takes place. It's perfectly subjective.
Yes.
And
I mean, for everything that he said about old timers, that's like a loaded word. There's something very specifically that he did acknowledge, which is that it's very important for all of that time spent be passed on in the form of this kind of Leela telling. Because that in and of itself cannot be, I can't imagine it out of nowhere. And by telling it, you're drawing others into the Leela of it as well, the participation, as you said.
And speaking of like that gift that the old timers have been given, well, I always have to laugh about that because now I feel like daughters are old timers.
All right, we're all old timers.
Like
the longer we sit around.
The ones that I used to, cradle and actually dry breastfeed. It's like, we're all old timers in this regard. Old timers is time and space measured.
Right.
From the egoic point of view relative to the process itself.
Right.
Absolutely not.
And old timers will become new timers.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, speaking, well, it's funny when you say old timers, I kind of like think, I'm not an old timer because I came in the 70s. Well, I knew of Beloved in 1975. I didn't come around until 1976. So I'm not really an old timer. Or if I identify with the old timer, is that I would understand Beloved's upset. Absolutely no argument or criticism, and the passionate veracity of which he would bring the criticism to us. And I could put it down to one thing. Did not stay with him in the process, in sync with his divine self-revelation. Is that criticism meant to shame us or to have us feel like we're guilty of something horrible? Or that we should therefore then be ostracized and never participate in because we just lost the plot and never got back on board again? Right. I mean, all of the different points of view that you can have about what old timers have done wrong that he criticized us about. In my heart feeling, it was that for all the reasons that I just enumerated that mind could immediately go to, I wasn't good enough, I wasn't strong enough, I didn't understand, I wasn't mature, I didn't have the fervor, I didn't have the passion, I didn't have the psychophysical capability, all the different things that you could apply to the reasoning or justification. What I failed to understand is that any of those justifications have no relevance of an actual excuse that would not enable a being to stay with the process in truth.
Right.
The important distinction being that there has to be the preparedness for the foundation maturity established to be able to stay with him. And that's what he was most upset about with the old timers, is that we didn't stay with him to help establish that foundation with integrity based upon the gifts that he had already given. So he had to keep starting over again, seemingly recapitulating, seemingly reestablishing his intimate sphere of life, so that the thread was maintained. And then that for him was I hate, this is like, sounds weird to say, but that was his undoing. and not that it was auspicious that had, like it had to happen for him. He said, no, none of this dramatization is necessary. He would have revealed the seventh stage process, however it happened, but he called it a tragedy. You know, it was the tragedy. And unless that is understood, then we're going to just keep perpetuating the same cyclical drama that we did around him, which is what, in that room that I described to you, while I was sitting and bringing these sacred articles to him, and we were going through each one, he had this out on the bed in front of him, and he was sitting cross-legged in his, half lotus, and at that time, in that moment, and leaning forward, and he's with his rocking, that just happens spontaneously, and then still, and then he'd come in and look really close at it, or he's always yogically, as he did, constantly in a process of yoga, profound yoga, of conforming the psychophysical mechanism. So it wasn't like he had a lot of time at 5 o'clock where he did yoga. It was a perpetual process of observing every breath, every sinew, every movement, every gesture was alive in this process of conducting bright reality truth in relationship to everything that was non-different. There was no recoil in his being relative to every interaction. And so, as I mentioned before, it was never casual. It was never unconscious. It was never uninspected. Like the heart impulse and the purity of this radical revelation, which he knew full well was going to be difficult and undoing of the mind and the bodily being of the entire history of humanity, for them to actually listen to hear, and to see, and to perfectly feel and be receptive to the point of being established priorly in reality truth, in the divine self position, was going to be really intense. And that was, like, all of us, every single one of us, whether we stayed on his body or not, indicated that we didn't stay with him in that process to the point of establishing a right relationship to him, around him, and giving him a culture that he could actually then say, this is it, this is it. See this is it, this is the foundation. You are blessed, and the gifts and the signs are manifesting now. I hate to keep repeating that because I know it sounds like it's a bit redundant, but these are his words. And this is what he did with us. He kept repeating himself over and over again in as many different ways as possible until, like as you said, it dropped. Like there was an indication that it was significantly dropped by sufficient enough individuals that there was a shift in the whole manifestation of his work, and a recognition response that gave him what was required for him to continue. And so again, back to this particular moment, which isn't any different than what I'm speaking about now. It's the same moment. It's the eternal time that's priorly established, coinciding with seeming time and space that is not separate in truth, and the beings that arise in it, and the patterning that arises in it. So when he touched each one of these, and at the end of it, I'll tell you what he said, because then it will sensitize you more to what I'm going to show you, is he said to me, he looked over at me, and with a well of emotion, no unguardedness, as if it wasn't socially acceptable for him to show his sorrow, or any emotion for that matter, that he said, we did have a sacred culture at one time, didn't we?
Hmm.
That I did not and was not expecting that, because of course at that time I was thinking, well, we have a sacred culture still. And so that moment initiated a reverberation again of consideration. What is the significance of that statement? And constantly I hear these, they're very potent invocations or considerations that were initiated as reality consideration, not it like the teaching years in emotional sexual reality consideration that is the context of all different forms of inspection or samyama about everything that arises, which is absolutely essential for this process in truth. There has to be that inspection. And that's what we are meant to do in our intimacies, in our devotional groups, you know, in the context of education. You know, everything is a consideration, a profound consideration. And so when he said this, of course, over all the years, I keep hearing and feeling what's the import of that, not what's the meaning of it. I just remember it. When you pointed back to a moment in time where in 2004, when Beloved indicated to me, he made the comment to me that cease to apply meaning to these psychophysical phenomenal experiences that you were having, because I was perpetually in that sphere of applying meaning to this intuitive being, like highly sensitized intuitive being. I showed him my environments that were filled with puja, like every single thing I did in life had a puja associated with it, every level of the being. And I showed him these things, and he said, cease to apply meaning to these. And then I joked around and I said to him afterwards in response, I did a ritual fire of burning a lot of things, you know? And I was constantly making mistakes, you know. It was like, oh my God. And then I remembered again him saying after I burned my art, when I came to him, you took it too far, you know. So it's like always this husbanding of remembering the initiatory force of something that he said. That's like that's the accountability that keeps one in check, so to speak, keeps one husbanded to the truth itself. You know, and if we lovingly help one another remember the Leela of that in our direct interactions with him, whether it be on his body or whether it be at a distance, that's true culture. And so when I realized that at a certain point, I went, this is when it's not a mind matter of thinking. It's a feeling matter of allowing the revelation and the lesson that suddenly becomes obvious. It becomes obvious. The truth reveals itself and then makes clear what corresponds or coincides and is a creative manifestation, a sacred manifestation of truth itself through the means of being a vessel to allow that to manifest. So this statement that he made to me at that point in time, we did have a culture, sacred culture, didn't we? And then I remember back at this time when he first began to instruct us in the sacred arts. He lived with people. He lived with men and women and children 24 hours a day. The only rest that he had from that was his Sukra Kendras. In terms of the psychophysical body going into a space that was seemingly apart, it was just because it was his space that was set apart for him specifically. Apart from that, he lived 24/7, not just with one or two or a few, but he had a life. And people gave their whole life over to him, to be available for him to work with in that way. And as years went by, those that he worked with began to fall away. for various reasons. And without making a judgment evaluation or valuation on how or why, I mean, that happened, okay? It has happened. The restoration or the regeneration in recognition relationship to the whole event of his Leela and his establishment of the sacred, I must understand the errors that I made in relationship to him that interfered with him being able to do that kind of direct work. He needed to be surrounded and to live 24/7 with a culture of true and free renunciates. That's sacred. That's sacred, right relationship to him. That's the setting apart, not where he is set apart so that he doesn't have anything to do with anybody anymore, and he's isolated or imprisoned, or, you know, just ceremonially and ritually or managerially, and all the errors that he so eloquently in his New York style described about how any of us were living with him. When he said that to me, I realized I got it now. I understand. No defense, no argument, feel no shame, feel no guilt. I do have a bit of a sense of, if only I could have been more mature. I would so have loved to be able to have stayed with him in that physical sense.
Yeah.
And I tried, and he tried over and over and over again, you know, up until 2006, you know, for me to be able to be around him, Nick to be around him, so many people to come and live with him. And as you know, you were another one that was offered. And Sukhumai tried to conduct that, you know, and we all had our liabilities of how we interfered with that. You know,
Well,
all
for
of us.
me, it was young and immature, which there was nothing I could do about based on the age. But it was
Sure.
almost like it was almost as if he was giving me permission to be young and immature, because I wanted to fit into what I understood he was calling for without having had the life experience that would have granted me the maturity to actually be capable of fulfilling something meaningful in that capacity for him.
Right.
So
right.
that was, on the one hand, I understand what you're saying. It's kind of like the flower has to fully blossom, and you have to go through all of those rites of passage and all of the lessons associated with being fully human before the spiritual maturity can even be fulfilled by grace.
Yes.
You know,
Exactly.
celibacy by grace. It's not, you can't just put it on.
Exactly.
Right.
Precisely. And that brings me to the moment in 1992, which I oftentimes will reiterate the importance of, is when, after the Kanyas, you know, we had spent years involved in the process of his evaluation, testing, and proving relative to the perfect practice, and the process that would take place based upon the depth of the causal knot, and even, you know, experientially becoming aware of the psychophysical structure of that mechanism in relationship to Amrita Nadi, you know, in the consciousness domain, you know, and even feeling like confessing to him, I feel like that I had transitioned to the seventh stage based upon this depth of feeling awareness of what I felt was the regeneration of Amrita Nadi from the depth place prior to the causal knot. And in no uncertain terms, he said to me, if you're asking me, are you now establishing, practicing, and prepared for the seventh stage process? He said, no, the signs are not there. And they say, now that's another moment in time where that process, the signs aren't there, Okay, I cannot with mind try to figure that out. I know that in the revelatory process of participation in the fashion that he established as the right yoga, that certainty of what the signs are that are required will be revealed. And he did reveal what those signs are that are required. And it has everything to do with what we're speaking about relative to sacred domain, truly set apart, acknowledgement and recognition of living in the bright domain, in the house, in his room, as one, as a culture, as a Sangha. the process doesn't even truly begin as the seventh stage way unless that foundation is established. And then again, you can go back and look at his teaching as you were referencing from his speech and his communication, even prior to when he started, even prior to reading the knee and listening. He was already indicating what that process, how that process would necessarily end up unfolding in order for him to address all the liabilities and limitations, and that he would be scapegoated by it. You know, and so he wasn't unconsciously participating, but he was acknowledging his own radical self-understanding about the nature of egoity, and that this is inevitably what would be superimposed on him. Yet he would always indicate that the manner in which the process would unfold was not merely associated with the gross persona. There was this the deeper personality, and then the causal dimension of being. So, like in your relationship to him, because you were young as a gross persona, clearly it was not arbitrary that you came into his sphere, because of the fact that whatever he was working with at a more profound level, your sensitivity to the radical process is abundantly clear. Does that make you better than somebody else? No. Just like it is somebody who seems to have something more in their deeper persona that's associated with the manifestation that's more tied with.
Trust me when I say I have plenty of flaws.
Yeah.
Gross,
And
subtle, causal.
And as we all,
But I don't care so much about being obsessed about that. It's not really the point.
No. And that's where the social persona and
Yes.
persona
You're
and
right.
the edible persona ends up interfering with the process and defining
Yes.
what true culture
Yes.
is not.
Exactly. I'm perfectly capable. I mean, it's neither here nor there. I understand and recognize that patterns are hell deep. They're hell deep. The point to try to change them isn't really the point or the process associated with awakening anyways. It's not really about that. So I'm perfectly compatible with a culture that would be willing to reflect whatever limitations, I may have, whatever my blind spots may be. For example, my manager expressing to me, these are your strengths. You don't tend to be aware of boundaries. I'm like, well, you wouldn't be the first person to tell me that. You know what I mean? Like, and this is how it potentially negatively impacts what we're doing here, right? So how to take responsibility for that consciously. The fact that my manager in a workplace can come to me in the moment and reflect it to me in an asana of, I feel nothing but love from this person. This isn't like somebody within our culture, but I feel love, I feel supported, I feel that she's actually trying to serve me, being able to be the best that I can be at whatever it is that and she recognizes strengths. She recognizes, that capability is invaluable in a true culture of service. So that's something that I feel resonates deeply with what Beloved did with you all.
Exactly. And being able to, like what you're saying, being in a workplace, which isn't really where you do live, you're living there a lot, but it's not your
in Zooms like this.
It's not your intimate domain.
No, it's not my intimate domain.
Your blood family or chosen family or a sphere you have invested yourself a lot into. So with Beloved, we were intimates. That was our 24/7 intimate sphere, and therefore then the trust and the dependency of that relationship was in, and the relationship. He was the one that revealed what true love is, and that which could be trusted because there was no opposite.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't. We superimposed or made out of it opposition, which is why, and made conflict and contradiction and controversy out of it because of our reactivity. and immaturity and lack of radical recognition and radical self-understanding. But did that destroy the condition of truth itself? No. But because that's where his the consistency and the perpetuation of and the constancy of the context itself was what proved itself. That's what proves truth itself.
Yes.
But also what he sensitized us to, and what he was reflecting to me by that comment, was that something that you are doing is interfering with sacred domain, establishment of, and right relationship to me in order to be able to work magnified most potently and therefore infiltrate, and to be consciously, when I say infiltrate, not like in a weird way or anything like a brainwash or anything like that, but for vessels to be receptively aware of this awakening spirit of love, bliss itself that conducts and husbands the being. We were always interfering with that. And so the potency of being able to accept and hear the criticism is absolutely as essential as the reception of love bliss.
Yes.
The water and the fire are actually the same.
Right.
It's the force of being itself.
Right.
You know, the non-difference between the he and she, and ultimately every aspect of the process doesn't have a duality to it, like the conscious process and conductivity. You know, the he and the she in sexual communion, or even if you're practicing your own body yoga, you realize that you don't even need a partner because the he and the she is in this entity, you know, always in a seeming battle that you have to be consciously aware of to actually practice own body yoga properly, and even done so sexually on your own body. You know, that the responsibility has to be yogically accomplished at every level of the being, and each entity seemingly arising in relationship to all the structures of the being has a unique configuration. And so each can be a unique sign for others and in relationship to others, or not like others, as a useful reflecting mechanism. So like whatever I may communicate about my process, or you or anybody else, I cannot necessarily superimpose what Beloved said to me specifically that has to be applied to you. You know, in other words, as he indicated, when we offer these leelas, as you participate in an installation of an art form, you come into the space and you make use of it in recognition, responsive devotion, in terms of how it applies to you, and not separately, but in relationship to the whole. How many hundreds of people have entered into that process with Beloved, if not thousands? But the key is to be able to facilitate, or to enable, or to serve, or to cultivate, to nurture, to draw people into that recognition process, and not draw boundaries that make it impossible, as if there is such significant distinction to be made between differences.
Right.
Even differences in, like Beloved said at the very end of his life, you know, in 2008, do not make overly much of the congregations. He said the congregations wouldn't even exist if you were prepared. Like the way doesn't even really begin for real until true hearing and seeing and the perfect practice. So, you know, the ones in positions of authority, or anyone assuming an ability to instruct or to serve or to be an elder or to speak truly about the process, we would have to acknowledge that we're all beginners in a sense, because the signs required are of the collective foundation necessary for the signs to say, this is the seventh stage way that we're demonstrating that we can show you, and we can actually guide you rightly. So like whatever I may say is only part of the picture, so to speak, but I can speak to the profundity of his revelation without applying meaning to it, or valuation or evaluation, because the mechanisms aren't there that would actually be able to support that through the process that he says why culture is necessary. No praise, no blame. You know, but that understanding needs to be humbly and consummately embraced by us all in his house. You know, all having access without making delineations that are inappropriate and not applicable given our collective and even individual thus maturity. I mean, I know that absolutely for sure, that there is no distinction to be made between myself and anyone who is actually being acknowledged as being a true devotee, and I'm not. I mean, we talked about this, and I won't go on about that, but the absurdity of it is tragically laughable. It's just crazy. And so this is where we're at in this moment in time, and the spell will break, necessarily so, because the heart is the true conductor, and the recognition responsive devotion is true in the heart of thousands of beings that will be a force that will not allow the wrongness or the falseness to continue. I absolutely trust that. That's because I trust the heart of the devotee, the true heart of the devotees. And also because I know that he indicated that it's not necessary to have to hide about it. You know, it's fruitless to hide or be afraid of implications. But I also know that there is a reluctance on the part of devotees, like I said before, to be honest about it, because there's the kind of sense that this, if you really are and you make yourself vulnerable, and once again you enter into the fire and the water, that your life will be turned upside down. Like in other words, if we actually did this with one another, there could be significant changes in all of the ways that we live and the choices that we make.
That's often how it was around him.
And that's how it always was around him, is that people were available for that kind of conducting, and that necessity to drop anything, you know, and
Radical
go
change.
as required to make his work happen for real, and something significant come about. So it will occur, and it is essential. You know, I know many devotees have been attempting to record their Leelas, you know, that also tell the truth of the Leela rather than what's been revised, you know, and being told by one in particular, and then others that are actually changing the Leela of how it actually happened, and trying to actually erase. Like I've been specifically, it's been a specific intention to erase me from sacred history. And I mean, and I feel embarrassed about it, by the fact that, oh my God, I mean, that's impossible to do.
It's totally impossible, Julie. I mean,
and it's like, not that it's like, okay, erase me, but like the sacred history, you know, it's just but there have even been attempts to go through the archives and get rid of certain things associated with certain people. I received a list of stuff that was related to my direct relationship to Beloved that was gotten rid of. You know, I mean, like the things that have happened, which I could go on and on about to enumerate the wounding that has occurred in direct relationship to my process with Beloved, that is just like gobsmacking.
there's a term for it. Historically, it's called whitewashing. I mean,
no, and ghosting and everything else, utter disrespect, while I'm being told that I'm being disrespectful. You know, and granted, yes, I've been annoying and bothersome and inappropriate at times, and putting my face or foot or mouth or nose in places where people don't want me. You know, I acknowledge all of that, how I've been a bulldog in a china shop and all those things that, like, I get these things slapped on me that are supposed to mean, well, does that mean I stop speaking about my relationship to Beloved or his process or how I understand it? The question, very loud and clear at heart, is absolutely not. Because the thing that he said to me, particularly in that moment after I asked him, is this the transition to the 7th stage process? And he said, no. I wept. I was sad. Like it's like so much had occurred and the signs weren't there, and it just spontaneous weeping, like a kriya of weeping. And he said to me then, leaning over very closely, he said, don't give up so easy.
Mm.
And when this is true,
Mm.
you will have to fight for it.
Yeah.
So then again, that's an initiatory indication of like, I wasn't really a fighter. I was strong, really strong and vocal and like, all energy, no technique kind of thing. But it's like, he said very clearly, and I gave up too easy. You see, like I would leave when it got really difficult and it became really clear to me that the culture was so fucked up.
Yeah.
That he was really upset all the time, and there was nothing I could do about it.
I understand that.
And I left. I went for a point and place of comfort, but then I discovered, not comfortable, no comfort anywhere in relationship to anything if the laws of radical devotion are not met.
No.
There is no seeking gesture that it can even be remotely equivalent to truth itself. The sufficiency of love bliss, being and living in relationship to one another as that, unarmored, visible, living with, participating in, no recoil. That's the beauty of our living with him.
Yeah.
And so I have some examples of this that I'll show you with these particular artists. This time when this happened, as I indicated, there was nine women and the 4 daughters, and then William and Patricia, Stephen and Mo, Hal and Sandra, and Greg and Emily, and James and his lady friend at the time. Oh, I'm so sorry, I can't remember your name. Yeah, well, there were many devotees who were participating in this process of manifestation. And essential, Agnello and, Crane and Fiona, and, it's just like these individuals, and even more succinct was the 9 ladies and then the mothers and fathers of the children. Well, there was just Beloved, and then there was William and Patricia, that were there, and Hal, and then, anyway, I don't need to name the names, but they know who they are, and it's in the sacred history. But this group of people were literally living day in and day out with him, like in communications and sending messages out, participating in instruction and passing things on. And, it was so alive. And so, every aspect of what was being done, he drew devotees in as a form of service and participation in the divine process, and to serve with him in his function to pass it on and to relate rightly to the environment that had been gifted to him as the mountain of attention sanctuary. And so there was a lot of study that was going on relative to not just the sacred traditions in terms of puja, but like, how do things function? How does the tree function? How does water function? Like, he got in touch with the Native American Indians in relationship to this space, and drawing in people, professionals and others who were elders from different traditions, coming in. It was all really a live samyama in consideration. And then the arts were involved in it, because one of the things that occurred is that there wasn't a lot of purchasing going on, apart from like Rodney had a specific function, and Marcia was also involved in a man named Carl and his lady friend Mary. There were many people who were involved in accessing different aspects of sacred art that would come from different traditions that would be brought into his sphere, and he would speak about, and they would become part of the empowerments of different temples, and be made use of in his Superkendra or in his home. And then the temples would end up having very special singing bowls or bells or different instruments that were used. And then the arts came alive. The guilds then were an extension of that. where every guild was the Prasad, the kitchen, every aspect of the Shadana Puja, which had the priests who were responsible for making sure that the places were served and cleaned rightly. Like, it wasn't just, oh, you got to clean the floor and you're lesser than the one that got the puja article, or there wasn't everything. He made clear that the mandala of beings was required to create a culture. A culture was an orchestration of every aspect of whatever was necessary to regard every aspect of it sacredly. So this is how we learned through this learning how to live life. That was the whole import of it. And then we were to live that with him 24/7. You see, as was shown for us to do in holy domains, in his home. So here is, this is one of the very first original, I'll put two of them up actually, because now forgive me in terms of actually being able to remember the precise details of dates and what actually was occurring at that time. But I don't have to worry about that too much, because the archive will become a sacred history museum. And the sooner the better for that, and in relationship to the basket of tolerance being published, because then devotees will be able to understand the development of the culture in this regard, which is the core of it. The core of it, the divine process. It's not about an institutionalization of it in, managerial terms. So here we have a couple of the articles here. And the interesting thing about it is that, okay, this is in 1979. One is from June and the other one is July. And on the back of it, and I'll turn it around to show you, but these are the original icons, the sign of life. My memory is fading a bit in terms of the details of being able to remember what these iconographic forms, the symbol, and see it's not too dissimilar to some of the images of his later transcendental art. He began to create these structures, visual. Yeah. So there were symbols, archetypes where you could enter into a space or a form, and that all had significance relative to the manifestations of the whole, and then of the gross, subtle, and causal. So you see, this is 1976. Now, bless her heart, Judith Mazur was the one who worked with Beloved a lot on this throughout all of the years. And that in and of itself would be an incredible museum or temple or gallery of all of these images being put up and having the teaching related to it. So every collection that he established was based upon understanding the nature of reality and how it is arising and how it actually fits into the spectrum of manifest form, and what these symbols, icons, pictures, dynamics, flows, energies, what they mean. So you can see here, I won't go into the iconography of it all, because that would be beautiful to do. At some point I will, but I just want to show you these. So inside of each of these packets, they either have ash from sacred fires that we learned how to do, whether it be an Agnihotra or a full moon puja or a new moon puja, or pujas for specific forms of purification or offerings, pujas for initiation, pujas for someone's transition, pujas for death, pujas for birth, initiatory pujas. We learned how to make use of elements, all of the elements in these processes. So these actually have ash in them, still presently, from these sacred events. And actually on this particular one, on the back of it, it says, I'll turn it around after I read it. Radiant Master, have mercy. First, and this is handwritten, and it's handwritten by Annie, because I recognize Annie's writing. And it says, first fire puja attended by spiritual master. First fire puja attended by spiritual master. And it says the master's name day, July 7th to 8th, 1979. So men and women and children would sit around together with blank pieces of paper and stamp on or paint on or with colored pens draw these images on these sacred packets originally, and then write or numbers of these, like, because this isn't the only one of these exists. I just saved these, you see.
Mm. And that was
And
that was the ceremony where he I have the yellow pages framed. I've seen the video of that puja, and
okay,
he whispered in everyone's ear.
the master's name day, Da.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was that day, huh? Is
Yeah.
that day?
And
So
that's also, I feel like I mean, again, I'm somebody that came, 1999. So everything that I've learned, it's one of these things, it's a story that's been recounted, right? Or something that I've read. It's not as if I was present physically for it, but obviously having associated that, I feel like, beloved, I am Da.
yes, yes.
That's when he gave that that essay or revelation of himself.
Yeah, yes, yes.
Aham Da Asmi.
Yeah, so that's where I'm of course whole bodily remember that whisper in my ear and his breath upon my face, you know.
Yeah.
Always call upon me by the name Da, Da, Da. That was at Holy Cat Grotto. So the place where this fire took place was actually a place that's called Red Sitting Man. It's in the bowl. It's out beyond Holy Cat Grotto. And so the ash would have come from this space
And
on
there
that
was an
day.
esoteric connection between these holy sites.
Yes, yes, yes. That was a passageway through the psychophysical structural being, but while it participating in the bright satsang of his sacred space and temple of being, in the mountain of attention being his empowered sanctuary.
Yeah.
So as you walk upon the grounds, you are entering his domain as bright being. In this, if the recognition response is activated, in meaning it's always present, but the response is required, and the giving over to participate in his house, the context of the bright. And so as you move through and would go through to these different sites and you'd sit down and participate in the puja, something unique is revealed, both as a initiatory blessing or transmission aspect of the inherent in being itself, or a lesson that is to be learned or grasped about the transcending of the errors associated with egoity in all aspects of psychophysical existence, gross, subtle, and causal.
Vision Mound.
Yes, so it says Vision Mound Sanctuary. That was Vision Mound Sanctuary. And this was our mantra: love, serve, remember. So, and then this was a very small one, and it also says on the back of it, Radiant Master have mercy, celebration of devotion, June 23rd, 1979.
7/23/1979. Devotion.
So there's hundreds of these, okay? So when you hit like radiant master, have mercy. You know, you feel into that expression and confession in relationship to him. You know, and this was the radiant master, have mercy. Like I bow down, mercy, you know, it's like mercy is compassion, you know, self-understanding yields that asana, self-understanding, not as a shame ego that's done something wrong that needs to be scolded, but it's like in this asana of I receive your grace, you know, radiant master, I receive your grace. You know, the mercy is that, and he says, my blessing presence is constant and always available.
Yes.
You know, it's not like he's sitting there and somebody does something right and then he says, you're blessed. You know, it's like constant, a perpetual blessing. You know, and then the availability and the preparedness for transmission of the spirit fire. You know, that dissolves attention in the heart. So these all of these different, this one has kumkum in it, which is the, you know, it's the used traditionally on the Ajna chakra, the red color. And you can see because it's got a bit of, the red has come out a little bit. So there's a bit of it that's around the edges. That's the kumkum.
Did Beloved ever instruct, or did he ever give any, did anyone ever ask him what is to be done with Prasad?
Oh yeah, well, it's all in the archives. Like it's
See,
all,
I've never even heard anyone
okay,
explain that.
So what you would do with Prasad,
Yes,
Prasad is giving the give back to the giver.
yes,
So when there would be this, the relationship is that's the
Yes.
perpetual reciprocation and giving of the self, and then it is recognized, regenerated. The regeneration is the knowing again of the self position, the condition, and the nature of its love bliss as love bliss. That's the actual core of it, the root of it. But then through the elemental form, it's enacted through the fire and the water. I've got in here, I've got, you know, the bottles. I think I have, where is it? Oh, here. So this is like a bottle from Holy Cat Grotto, you know, and actually, you know what? I take that back. This isn't from Holy Cat Grotto. This is Prasad water. But we got these bottles. If it was Holy Cat Grotto, you'd see probably more sediment in it because it doesn't have a marking on it. That's why I'm saying I'm sorry. I have some that do have markings, but these, we would receive elements, elemental aspects, ash, water, fire, incense, flowers, sweets, nuts, or actual gifts, you know, like a shawl or a hat. Or Prasad was constantly being given and exchanged. That was always the ritual form of it. Is that you would put it on. You put it on. You take the. You'd open up the little packet, and you take some of it. I'm not going to open these up because they're so old and precious. I don't want to do that. But and I would have. It's very likely that I have opened these already. I would have. And I would have taken some of it, and as was traditionally done, you take it on, you know, and you put it onto your forehead, or the kumkum's put onto the forehead. You can put it anywhere on any chakra, anywhere on your body, really. I mean, traditionally, there are certain places that would be associated with the chakras because they represent aspects of the being. Or you take the ash and you put it on your forehead, just like you see done in anointing murtis or icons. You know, you're actually acknowledging. It's an acknowledgement, an installation, an empowerment, a recognition, an invocation. And in the uniqueness with the puja with Beloved is that you're acknowledging what always already is.
right.
That's the distinction between coming into a sacred space or doing any form of sacred puja. Like if you're always asking for something or always seeking something, then you're coming into the space asking for blessings rather than actually acknowledging that you're already established in blessing, in the blessing grace. Very important distinction between ritual and ceremony and true priesthood.
Yes.
is that you come into the space and you're already acknowledging the source condition, and everything is conformed to it then through making use of elements, rather than coming into a space and saying, oh, I have to invoke beloved in this space.
Right.
No, that's not right puja.
No.
That's not radical puja.
Right.
Or that I come into this space and, oh, I'm not a devotee, I'm just an ego, so fix me,
Right.
or give me this or give me that. No, that's not the right relationship. That it is between true devotee and reality, truth, or being itself. Being itself, the beloved itself, beloved, Siddha. That was his function and demonstration, to give us that communication, the truth of our condition. The actual relationship is not anything absent, not anything missing, nothing to seek for. So when you actually do true puja, that's how you live and relate to one another. That doesn't mean that everything that arising just as it is A-okay and we can fucking do whatever we want. No, that's not divine.
No, but
that's
it'll be self-evident what rightening is required.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can't righten if you already aren't in that. That's radical root devotion. Life comes out of that true asana being lived in relationship to everyone and everything. That's right life, not taking on a form that somebody tells you have to do because you're told to do so. It's an actual revelation and unique to each individual that does correspond to very specific instruction by him, definitely relative to every aspect of life, but it can only occur in the asana of a true devotee that's not presuming a problem or in doubt or in conflict or fucked up or like saying, I don't understand why I don't feel well. Meanwhile, just observe and understand. It's not like you're bad and do this instead. It's like, be wise about it. Exercise discrimination, experiment.
Who is the one that feels bad? I mean, I'm not trying to sound like this sex 60, but I mean, ultimately there's all kinds of forces at play all the time that are making up
yes, exactly.
of the sense of self.
Well,
self.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. I'm really glad you brought that up because that brings us forward to the seeming culminating time of the last few years of his life. And not just the last, but more, he took everything full circle by including the preliminary perfect practice, so that it was to remind us, it's not just about disciplines or puja or meditation or yoga or diet or it's not about conscious process and conductivity, right life, even devotion, even not about devotion. All of that must be mastered and husbanded by me, the realization of the perfect process, perfect knowledge, unqualified reality, truth. And if we ever relate to one another upon the basis of that being absent, making that presumption that it's actually absent, then we can never relate to one another rightly. But that doesn't mean that everybody and anybody is actually really in that asana of even understanding what that implications, the significance of that recognition is, and then the availability to actually be maturing in that.
Right. Well, he gave it as a gift to so many. The intuition of it, the tacit recognition of it. He initiated that in so many beings. The capability to practice on the basis of that and to live life on the basis of that is obviously the signs.
Yes. And so I want to go ahead.
Just to connect something that you were just describing before, it reminded me of a line from one of his poems where he says, no one enters my room suddenly. I am already there. I am always already there. And then he goes on to say, and my form is love. Always already. The seventh stage demonstration is love. It was love and embodied in his form so fully. I also feel like there's something that I always what I experienced of puja. So I came in 1999, right? And you're talking about 2002,
Mm.
sitting on his bed, and he's reflecting to you that there used to be true culture.
Mm.
So by the time I came in, whatever was happening, and I got drawn into sacramental services. There was a whole process about it that was very well established. There was a kind of machinery associated with getting flowers. They had to be put a certain place. Certain things had to happen a certain way. And I was being trained in a certain form associated with participating in the sacred culture in this way. So there was very much a sense of right way and wrong way, for example, and even puja on the murti, for example. I remember having no sense, but having observed what the form was, and some aspect of that must have gotten committed to my memory to some degree for me to feel sufficiently confident after purchasing from the store at the sanctuary all of the sacred elements and having them prepared and by the murti to finally be capable of doing a puja. I mean, I really just wanted to do the puja on beloved's body. And so I just started doing at least what I could remember. And Tamara walks into the room in the middle of me doing this. And she's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I had covered him in kumkum everywhere. It was just like,
Right.
So I always find it amusing when people, ask questions about it, because I'm like, well, just do it. I think it's like, naturally there is a form, there's a meaning, there's certain aspects about it that but a lot of that too is mine. I just wanted to worship him, So,
Sure.
so there was a little bit of that in my own process.
Yes. Well, it reminds me of the difference between watching how Beloved did puja and how it would become when he said that we made it ritualized and ceremonial.
Yeah.
Because while we learned some of the idiosyncrasies that were considered to be traditionally like correct, and you just wouldn't do certain things, he threw all that away. Like when he would do puja, it was so spontaneous that he couldn't be constricted to what was right and wrong in that regard, because it was a moment in which it was so alive and integrated and non-different in relationship to every element or being that was surrounding him, that if he was restricted to having to make sure that he did it in a rote form, it wouldn't be effective.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had the blessing of being able to witness him doing puja on the Nandi Bull statue. And well, not even that. I think there was other footage where I witnessed him doing puja on statues within the Sukra Kendra. And that was so profoundly initiatory in terms of simple, the swiftness, the directness. There was just, and even the Shodhana puja, he there was nothing about it that he got down into it and just, he gave everything of himself at every level of the process until it was installed, and then that was it. It wasn't, there wasn't fussing or, there wasn't a sense of being made overly much of it. It felt profoundly functional in its essence. Like it felt not rotely functional. It felt imbued with a divine function and purpose. And once he had accomplished that, it was complete.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he would acknowledge when that was effectively done by those that he'd empowered and instructed to do that.
Yeah.
So imprinted is him in the effectiveness or rightness. I don't even right and wrong is like, don't like those words, but
Right.
in it, because it can have a wrong connotation. But as you saying that, it reminds me one time when he was at out at the Matrix, and he was in his before the Super Kender was built, the one that's the exterior right above his house. He had that Super Kender inside of his bedroom that was where his bathroom was. I mean, there's a lot that's changed structurally in the rooms that he lived in, throughout the years on all the sanctuaries. But he was working in the Super Kender that was off of his bedroom. And he was in there just by himself, and he actually was putting something up on the wall, and he needed to have a hammer. And of course, the men never liked him having a hammer in his hand, didn't want him to hurt himself or something like that, just concerned that he might. And and so he was in there, and we could hear him, making some kind of a sound like, oh, or what, aware that something happened, and we wanted to know what occurred. And then he's in there for a lot longer, and he comes out, and he's got a big bruise on his lip. And he said that at one point he was hammering something up on the wall, and the hammer came back, and he hit himself on his lip, and he started bleeding quite a bit. And then, but he said that he couldn't be bothered by that in that moment, so he took his thumb and put it up underneath his into his mouth, and he said he just healed himself immediately and stopped the bleeding so that he could go forward with what he needed to accomplish in this. So that's like, you talk about functional, it's like, even with a mistake made, he had to stay right on focus or point relative to what it was that he was accomplishing in that space, in his set apart room. And so to make the point relative to the spontaneity and being able to be free in it, like there are certain things that are better to do and better to not do. Like, it's not just like anything goes in these sacred spaces and it's okay.
Right. No, of course. Yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't trying to suggest that at all.
No. What I was saying is that, like, I would imagine that when Tam came in the room, she was probably joyfully amused. Like, like, wasn't that there was anything wrong, because I know that we've had kind of all sorts of ashen elements put all over our bodies, and even all over him, and not being so careful about, like, just the ash falls all over, trying to be so careful about, like, fixing it all up to make it look pretty. That's ceremonialism. That gets to be too ritualized. It's okay,
It's
just
distracting.
yeah. It's you put it on, and if it's not completely straight, that's big deal. But of course, like you see sometimes in occasions where beloved's in darshan, and there's care being taken about the shawl, the way that it's put on, or the way that he's seated, and in part that's just for his comfort, and he's maybe asked for it to be done, or also the knowledge that there's going to be photographs taken that will inevitably be used as murti forms. So there is balance. There's an aestheticism to it. There is a sensitivity to the place not being dirty or being unconscious. But there are ways when it just goes too far. I can give you another example where I was in India at Tiruvannamalai, and at the Dham Mantra Cafe, and above the Dham Mantra Cafe, there was an open gathering space, darshan hall, meditation place, where a lot of different things happened with devotees and others from the public who would come up there to be able to feel beloved's and receive beloved's darshan. And of course, you could see Tiruvannamalai from there, and it was all integrated with the traditions that were surrounding. It was really beautiful. And Jerome, the dear devotee who passed away this year, really sad circumstances, but I was really moved by him, because I could feel his unabashed passion for beloved so strongly, and his heart yearning to be embraced and instructed, and to be free to be able to participate in his relationship with beloved. And he was acutely sensitive. He was one of these beings that I knew immediately when I felt him that this is a man that needs to be cultivated and served, because he could be of great service to beloved because of his sensitivity. And the feeling of his recognition was inspiring to me. It was like, this is magnification occurring here really strongly, unabashedly. And whenever he would do the Murti puja, and at that point, I didn't know when I was there who had been trained, who hadn't been trained, or whatever. It was irrelevant to me, really, seriously, because my sensitivity wasn't about the rightness or wrongness of it, because the point was about what was felt, the feeling. Like when you're in that space, if your attention is on what somebody is doing right or wrong, you completely lost it. You're not in the room of conscious light, and that's where attention and energy is evaluating what's happening in sacred space. And yet it will become glaringly obvious if there is something really unlawful being done, because it won't feel true to heart. It doesn't matter about the more superficial aspects, but Jerome's sensitivity to the Murti form and the invocation was really potent. And then, and I would say this to him, that I was really moved by that. And one of the devotees who had come from the States afterwards, and I won't name his name because I don't want him to feel embarrassed or feel like I'm trying to shame him or whatever, but this is someone who I would have thought might have known that wasn't really the thing to say or to acknowledge after that puja. What's he wearing shorts for? He's not supposed to wear shorts while he's doing puja. Sorry, even the way I'm saying it sounds a bit obnoxious, but that's what I felt that's really obnoxious to say. What the heck does that have to do with what you just participated in? Like how many times you swing the incense, whether you're calling beloved Bhagavan, or whether you're using the correct mantra that's been designated to be the mantra that you use, when there's a whole list of invocations and mantras and names and, the forms of puja that you could use. What matters if you feel like beloved's body, or you want to just put water all over it, and do it 3 times, or, maybe put 5 flowers instead of 1 or 2. It's like all of those things, when they become too much the focus of the process, like becoming too the codes and structures, the congregations, the orders, like when it all becomes the focus, you're already establishing yourself outside the sphere of the
subordinating to mind rather than heart recognition of beloved, because you're having to remember these things. I mean, imagine it's actually not setting beloved apart at all. It's not at all recognizing the sacred domain and serving the continued 24/7 process of setting him apart. It's not doing that when that's allowed.
Yes, and when you say that, you're reminding me again of another thing that beloved said to me. Being an artist, and that's what I did my whole life, and what I studied in college up until the moment that I, was entered by him and brought into his sphere at UCLA, was that when I showed him my art and that process occurred, and I released that for a while. After a while, I didn't engage actually doing painting and drawing and all that kind of thing much around him until very much later on, when he asked me to paint Murti forms of him. And he said to me that the reason he had me relinquish my original training of how I learned art is that I needed to establish the yoga and intimacy with him so that I could have both the skills technically and the asana with which to be able to enter into this true puja of establishing, like painting his Murti form. Io knows of this, and Lynn knows of many devotees who know of establishing what is most sacred as the Murti form requires both skill, but the skill is secondary. There are skills that need to be learned, and there are a lot of different skills that you have to let go. Once you know those skills, he said, it's only then the skills, then let them go. And then that's when the sacred, in the context of the sacred space, is where you can be free to actually bring the empowerment of establishing the murti or acknowledging the murti form.
One can
And-
even say that about the disciplines. The disciplines are, it's a little bit like training the psychophysical structure to, it's simply like the training associated, but at a certain point, it doesn't actually have anything to do with the real process that one is entered into, except as a supporting secondary mechanism.
Yes,
Right.
yes. So you will get artists or priests or all sorts of different skills of people who may have really refined skills, or some who may not have any at all. And you could have them come into the same space. And well, technically, you could see a form being presented that may seem to be really finely done, but it doesn't have any spiritual force to it.
Right.
And whereas somebody who didn't could then just do something spontaneously and with the full heart of feeling being and right responsive recognition, could manifest a sacred form, sacred art that would have a lot of potency to it. But what Beloved also wanted to call together was wedding that. You know, there are some skills, there are technicalities, but it must be wedded. And that's where Adi Da would say each devotee will find where they dance in service to him. That's what creates the guild. You know, it is the respect and acknowledgement of a passion or a skill or a capability. Some people have it innately, some people need to grow into learning it, but it's all again, as puja, done in the context of bright recognition, the yoga, the intuition, and the maturing in that grows the capability to actually truly be able to practice the yoga and be inspirational, be an elder, be an instrument, be a guide, be an authority to govern, to husband, to be one with, and then collectively in relationship, allow the magnification of the bright to occur. So I'll just hold up some of these and maybe won't say a whole lot about them. I'll just maybe read to you. Oh, I want to read to you what's on the back of this one because I'll just do this for a while, okay, without my words. So here's the, it says on the back.
Day of divine instruction.
Yeah, this is the Kum Kum one. Beloved, I am Da, the living fire. What is surrendered in me becomes holy ash, the excess light of God. Let body and mind be healed by remembrance and this gift of love. The sign of my birth is Scorpio, marked by the images of spirit and sex, the eagle and the crab. It is the sign of internal warfare, the problem and perfection. I have played in the dilemma of my natural alternatives, but from my earliest experience of life, I have enjoyed a condition that I would call the bright. Very early in life, I conceived a purpose in the bright. It was to restore humor. Throughout my life, I have been moved to find and communicate the fundamental source of humor to others. It appeared in many forms as enjoyment, laughter, faith, and knowledge. But at last, it has only one form, which is reality itself. Da. So this is Sukamai's writing. It says, to our beloved master, the giver of life. And then on the back, there's the padukas, and I'll read to you what it says. Those are the first padukas. Now you can see this is on my Tumba 81. At least it could be on, I think it's 81. Well, there's other ones like this. Okay, so it says, oh, the radiant person is standing in his lover's heart. Supreme joy is given at this rising place of the master's feet. Let the flower of devotion enlighten the heart and brighten the world.
So these were all composed by devotees initially.
Yes, yes.
See, that's an interesting observation about the quality and the characteristic of this early time that I feel Beloved criticized in later times in the form of a culture that had come to own and know his word and control him through knowledge, mere knowledge of his word and familiarity of his word, rather than the devotional expression that can make a mistake, can say it wrong, can, not say it exactly right, can not do the puja exactly right, but at least it's being expressed here in this early form freely. It's being allowed to be composed in the voice of the devotee out of devotional recognition. It's being allowed. It's creating the devotional culture by allowing that. So that's what I feel is an interesting observation for me, because by the time I came in, for example, all those devotional packets, they are printed with his words.
Well, yes.
And they are, it never even occurred to me that there were packets at any point in time that had words that were devotional expressions of devotees. But I feel that there's something.
I'd have to go. You'd have to go through and see what was just a devotional expression. Yes, that's a really good point. And so that kind of samyama is really significant. And when you're saying that, these devotional expressions would often be made to him in prayer,
yes,
or in devotional chanting.
Yeah.
Radiant dawn, giver of life. That I surrender, and we'd all do different forms of invocation and chant.
I always found it.
Ray Lynch was one of the, his expressions in music, chantings. Susan Potash, many of these people you might not even have heard of, possibly. But these people were key. Colin and Lena Clark, many people around throughout the years have come into the sphere to imbue Beloved's life with incredible forms of invocation, through training or not, or skills or not, but the devotional response was always spontaneous, and that expression persisted. And I praise the name, and I chant the name, Da, the name is in my heart.
That's one of the chants I learned when I came. Yeah.
We do that, in super, cycles. What do you say when you sing on top
Call
of
and
one?
response.
Well, not just call and response. It's like if I.
Oh, yeah. No, it's like, I understand what you mean.
The name.
And then
And then,
I come
then
in,
you
right?
start in right there when I start that.
Yes, exactly.
Then it would just get full, it get more and more magnified, and ecstatic to kirtan, into kirtan.
Yeah.
And then it would like there'd be nothing except for the bright space of being, and we would be all completely ecstatic
Right.
in the kirtan, and we did that, that was, apart from being in his physical company when we could do that. And we would do that on his body too. These kirtans, that's what he taught. Like we learned kirtan in his direct physical company, and the waving of the lights. And it was always, there was no form superimposed on his, and it was totally spontaneous, completely ecstatic. Just and you'd have all sorts of people coming up and picking up the lights and waving it. Like there's a beautiful image of in 1992 actually, which was an occasion that I remember very poignantly because I was about to leave the island, and there was this ecstatic darshan that occurred in the courtyard on the island out of the Matrix, and it's just, everybody's up there just so on his body with the lights and the incense, and it was so wild. You can see as the photographs are taken, the trails of the light, and you can smell the incense, and you can feel the ecstasy, and you can hear the hearts shouting in joy or weeping in love, and it's just so full. And that's true puja. You see, it didn't have a ritualized form to it. The elements were all there, but it was complete ecstasy. Yeah, and this is another one that was like printed, a different form, an art form of padukas. Kawahi la'a, Guru Purnima, da.
Wow.
So that was probably that was Hawaii. And this is the same, 1981. So these are hand done, And this is what he meant when he wanted to have a culture of artists. Like the culture itself is the culture of artists because all is sacred art.
Yeah.
That's what he would talk with me about, a lot in 1976. And this is Nina's writing. And like I said, this wasn't just one. Like we would have all been, there would have been one doing that line around the outside with a little marker pen, and then somebody doing a duplication of his sacred image, part of losing face. This is it's so beautiful.
Losing face.
This a number of devotees participated in creating his ash packet while sitting around and chanting, talking about beloved. What's beloved doing? Oh, I don't know. What's he doing today? What do you think's going to happen? Oh my gosh, did you hear about this? Oh my gosh, that's so ecstatic. Oh my gosh, did you hear about this? Oh no, what's going to occur?
It's going to become like baseball cards where, it's like, oh, you have the 1981 ash packet.
That's for sure. So beloved Da is a name of the living God. What is surrendered in the life fire of eternal being becomes holy ash, the excess of light, the excess light of divine grace. Let body and mind be healed by remembrance and this gift of love. this one then was actually a typed version of the original one that was actually done in his. This one was more done. And Lydia could very well have done this one because she's the one that is able to
Right, in his style of
handwriting.
writing.
You
Mhm.
see, this is the same expression.
Love it, Todd.
Now it's in print form. And you think, well, in print form, yes, this is wonderful, but look at the written, like to have that in his pen.
Yeah.
And maybe even perhaps, I don't know, maybe even the way he wrote these words were combined. I don't know, maybe that's his handwriting, and duplicated. This is where you could find all this information out in the archives itself.
Aw, Robert, that's so beautiful with Nandi.
So this is what,
That's a really nice one.
yeah, this is
That's like a collector's item right there. Sorry, but it's so
no,
cool.
it is. And this is true. They're just
I mean,
beautiful.
imagine that's a piece of art that, a
No,
lot
it
of
is.
people would love to have that.
Yeah. So it's like, if to take a photograph of that,
Yeah, that's really
and
cool.
be able to, people have that image. And I'm like I say, I've got so many here. I tell you, they're all works of art, really works of art. So this one says, this is from the time called Breath and Name, and it says, be the heart, radiate the whole body, feel radiance as the whole body. Be constantly aware of the real presence and be submitted into it with every part of every breath. So with each of these invocations, you see, you could spend a whole day or a week or a lifetime on retreat, with these invocations being alive. I do not know what anything is. I is the name of the body. I is not within. I is Narcissus, the bodily self-contraction. Therefore, be surrendered as the body in the life field and inquire, avoiding relationship. Inquire thus and realize the radiant self-bliss in which the world, the body, and the mind and I are arising. And then I'll just show you a couple more just to indicate. These are so sweet. The children doing the ash packets. Now, okay, here, this is really early on. And what's the quote on the back of this? Consciousness is the ultimate form or state of knowledge. Now, this is a child painting this, and the profundity of this writing. And how is this any different than what was communicated at the end of his life?
Right. Yeah.
They're so sweet. These are so sweet. Consciousness is the transcendental one and eternal principle of existence. It's very likely that these were done by Hamlin at this point in time. It's amazing. Consciousness is that which, when fully realized, sets you free from all bondage and all seeking.
Wow. Eleutherios is spelled out in Greek.
Mm.
Wow. Beautiful.
So, I mean, this is why I one of the things I said to you is that I would like to, take a photograph of all of these. They need to be
I feel
photographed,
like that's important for sure.
front and back. Woo! The ash just came falling out. Listen, my heart. This is the confession of the Master. And then in quotes, the Master submits to devotees in order to provide the unique means for their liberation. Unquote. Therefore, practice the way with great devotion and intuitive understanding. And these are the padukas that Beloved wore all the time. Like these were the kind of sandals that he wore most often in his earlier years of teaching, and obviously would have, discovered them in India.
Mm.
They were originally in leather, and then later there were some that were duplicated or that were made out of a different kind of material that would last longer, particularly in the tropics.
Mm.
Ooh, you can see the ash falling out of this one. Ooh, that's why I have to be really careful with this one. So it says, listen. Oh, I did read that. I wanted to show you that. And as you can see, the circle is on the heart on the right.
Yeah.
And this is in a packet from the initiation into the invitee on a Buddhist order. So as we've discussed many times, there were orders. There were always an establishment of orders. That was his particular necessity. He wanted to establish an order that he could fully acknowledge and test and prove. Which still will come into being. It will occur. But as he's indicated, the manner in which it will happen will be by his establishment and testing and proving process, not by our ego politicking.
It's I feel his transmission so potently through the computer. It's just so strong. It's very, very real. His his work, and I mean, it's unmistakable.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
unmistakable.
Yes. Yes. And this is every sanctuary, actually the sanctuaries should be open to everybody conducted by true priests, to be able to enter into these spaces of empowerment, that would nurture and serve and cultivate and inspire and demonstrate the process itself, and therefore be able to say, the archives being a place where you could see and feel the potency of all this transmission.
Well,
This
it has an initiatory force to it.
All I have asked is that you understand. It is a simplicity signaled in many ways. Do not imagine it is more or less than my plain word, the time you heard me and understood. Master John, the need of listening.
Is that a staff of his?
Yes, yes. Presently, Patricia's in the archives now, going through all of the things that were directly related to him, his clothing in particular, and putting them into context and corroborating them with periods of time and Leela. Radical root devotion is the radical way of understanding the time that we heard, truly felt and understood, the simplicity of that. Recognition of the bright divine self condition. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're going to need to get your camera and photograph each one.
Yes, 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 because we could actually literally spend all day here,
But for the purposes of recording it fully, that seems like the inevitable.
Yeah, and so when Beloved went through these that day, I put them in consecutive order, so that
He looked at each one.
Yeah, he looked at each one.
Wow.
So that it's not only the empowered from the time, but then the empowerment that he gave with that instruction, that he gave to me when he looked through these is part of the Leela.
Yeah.
The continuing instruction about true sacred process and practice and sacred domain. So I have to pass that on. I have to. And there's one that actually fell out. That were 4 of them. So I'm pretty certain that in 1982 it would have been Shani Tamran, Namleela, and EO that actually did these particular packets.
Something tells that I'm just going to make a guess that I could be totally wrong, but something screams Tamarind about that one to me. I don't know. I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, that would be fun to actually,
to verify. I will send in the last one.
Will say when they did. Well, there's a lot of art, and things that they integrated with Beloved in all of their sacred arts. Their life is entirely imbued with this instruction. And I won't say anything more because they are not being made right use of themselves. It's just something that really needs to be shifted about that. embracing of them. So this one says on the back, do you know what anything is? Do you?
Yeah. That seems like yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Such a blessing.
Finally, I can do this. Yay!
What better way to pass the time?
Well, there isn't, exactly.
Beloved's crashing down.
24/7, I have so much, to pass on. I can't even begin to, I could literally do this every day for the rest of my life. With all that's been given and the his Leela directly associated with it. It's yeah. Shine from here, empowerment ceremony, May 28, 1985.
Wow. That's really a beautiful. Wow. Thank you. That's the date that I went to serve him. So that's especially
Okay, beautiful.
yeah.
Mm, mm. Oh, yeah. I could just keep doing this. There's like in the back here, this is a whole different kind of a page of Prasad. I'll just without taking that kind of, see, this has got,
Wow. So some of those are other forms of prasad aside from packets.
yeah, and these would be, he'd give all sorts of different kinds of objects at times. Even he has a piece of coal that Don Garradale one time. He wasn't going to give us any gifts because he was making a point about we were not living in the right relationship, so he gave us each a piece of coal.
So
And then you've got, these are leaves from empowered sites, that would or Prasad. Okay. One thing I noticed that happens is, with doing this is that, like you say, the empowerment and the feeling of his presence is so strong that you do need to actually take a time of retreat,
yeah.
to allow the gifts of what is being given to be fully received and then conducted and being completely given over.
Thank you.
Love you.
Love you too.
Love all beings.